We all want to be happier, but how do we get there? First, we start by realizing happiness is not a destination. Being happy consists of micro action steps every single day. I'm your host, Brittany King, and I'm here to guide you along the way. Well, hello, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to the Positively Real podcast. I'm your host and coach, Brittany King. I got a fun series episode coming to you for the month of July. Now, I feel like this is very fitting. If you're watching the video, you will see I have cool hair. I got a tie-dye onesie on. Nothing says summer more than this vibe right now. And it was funny because I was thinking about, no, don't record right now. You need to be more polished and put together. And then I was like, says who? Like, doesn't matter if my hair is down and I'm not in a tie-dye onesie. And like, the content is fire for today's episode. And what I look like when you're watching, if you have thoughts about it, that's totally fine. My thoughts are, it is summertime. I was going to record this earlier, but this is the joy of just being flexible with yourself and not rigid, having a plan without it being so intense, like it has to be done or you can't have any fun. My daughter woke up from her nap and I wanted to go swimming. It's like, I could record this podcast now, or I can record it when she goes down for her bedtime. And my husband and I have been switching off nighttime routine to give us some more time for ourselves in the evening, which has been lovely. For the first 2 years of her life, we did it together, which was amazing, but it's time to kind of start doing it separate, especially with baby number 2 on the way. If you're listening to this episode, I am 37 weeks pregnant. So baby number 2 is going to be here so soon. And I'm recording the series of episodes for you in the month of July, because when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, I was thinking about, 4th of July theme for the month, and then emotional liberation came to me. And ever since I made that decision, just this conversation around emotions has been very much happening with myself, my husband, my daughter, my clients. Obviously in the work that I do, I'm always talking about emotions, but it's just been a very prevalent topic, and the signs are all there. And I was like, I'm going to record this episode. So it's going to be a series of episodes. And instead of just talking about emotions and emotional regulation and all of that for the weeks to come, I'm actually going to dive into specific emotions that we all experience regularly, and emotions that I have been working through and with in my own journey. And I just want to share with you how I'm handling them and what I'm doing to change my relationship with them. And before you turn off this episode, because you're like, ugh, emotions, I don't want to talk about emotions, that might give you a little insight into what your beliefs are around emotional well-being. Because we've been programmed and we have a lot of conditioning about emotions, that they're too soft, they're too fluffy, you're too sensitive. If you have a lot of emotions, you get labeled as weak. You are told that you need to suppress them or ignore them and just to smile and act like everything's okay. And, this impacted me a lot in my life because I was always deemed the happy one. And everyone's like, my disposition, she's just so happy. And so when I started to not be happy, as all adolescence goes through, I thought there was something wrong with me, and I suppressed those parts of myself. I wouldn't allow myself to be unhappy. I wouldn't allow myself to be angry. I was the cool one. I was the cool girl. I could just let anything slide off of me. Except it didn't slide off of me. It slid deep down into me and got stuck in different parts of my body, which also made me disconnected from my body. And all of that's to say, I've been spending a lot of time with my emotions. Can you tell? So today's episode is really going to focus on emotional liberation and dive into what emotions are. And I also want to give a little insight. Instead of a book review this month, I'm going to do a movie review around Inside Out 2. If you haven't seen it, please go see it. Make it a priority. It is So good. Pixar does it again. If you haven't seen Inside Out 1, start there and then go see Inside Out 2. I mean, the way that they explain something that can feel so complicated and complex is brilliant. And Inside Out 2 is all about self-concept and belief system. So, your girl was geeking out. I think I was crying before the movie even started. So I want to talk about that too, and just different scenes and different themes throughout the movie that I thought would be really helpful to share with you in this episode. So, kind of a twofer. We got a little twofer action going on. We're going to talk about emotions as a window into what's happening inside of us. And then we'll talk a little bit about Inside Out and the different themes from the movie that really just got me good. Just got me good. I really do think that Inside Out 2 is one of the most important movies that we can watch this year. It's so important to watch this movie and really understand and see the inner workings of our inner world in a way that is playful and in a way that is tangible with these different characters. And I will say, inviting in the emotion of anxiety when the main character Riley is going through puberty is just so perfect. It is so perfect. So we'll come back to that. But what I want to talk about right now is emotions on a very basic level and what emotions mean, what they are, and what we can do with them. So, this series is about emotional liberation, and I really hope by the end of this month you feel equipped with tools and understanding of yourself on a deeper level to manage and process the difficult emotions and the positive emotions as well to make you feel more in control of your life. So, why is it important to understand your emotions? Well, in the most simple form, emotions are data, it's information. It's trying to signal to ourselves to pay attention that something isn't right or that something is right. It goes both ways. It's not just all the negative. I also want to make sure I highlight that there's no such thing as a negative or positive emotion. If I say negative or positive, what I mean by that is ability to feel it's like a helpful or unhelpful, right? A difficult or easy emotion to feel. That's how I categorize emotions. Like some emotions are easier to feel than others. Some are really hard to feel, so hard that we have suppressed them and not felt them. So I do want to start saying there is no such thing as a bad or good emotion. And all that emotions are trying to give you information. It's a window into your beliefs, it's a window into your thoughts, it's a window into your needs, it's a window into your desires. It really is just trying to communicate with you and help you pay attention to something, right? Something in your environment, something that's not settling right. Now, thoughts do create how you feel. However, feelings sometimes come before we're even aware of what the thought is. So, if we're more attuned to how we feel, then we can trace it back to the types of thoughts that we're having in our subconscious mind that might be creating these emotions in our body. So, it's really important to understand emotions because understanding your emotions help you understand yourself. And I think that's the best gift that you can give yourself is to connect in a way that's much deeper than a lot of us can go right now. I think because we put on this mask and this happy face that everything's all good all the time, we get so disconnected from our bodies and get so disconnected from our emotions and what they're trying to signal to us. So, emotions are signals and guides. And the more you can lean into them and get curious about them, the more you're going to understand about yourself. So, what is an emotion? It's simply a vibration in your body. That's all that it is. It gets triggered by a thought, sends a message to your body, communicates with your body, it's talking, and then that signal communicates back to your brain and it creates your actions and behaviors. And so a lot of times, like the behaviors and actions that we have, we don't realize that those behaviors are coming from a way that we feel. Everything we do or don't do is based off of how we think it's going to make us feel. And so when we look at our behaviors and let's say we don't like our actions, we can trace it back to, well, if I don't like my actions, what was I feeling before I took this action? And it just becomes this internal signal that becomes your guide. And then it helps you understand your behaviors and your decisions. And what a gift to have that awareness. Now, the role of emotions are to reflect our inner state, our inner landscape. So when you can just check in with yourself first thing in the morning, it's going to give you a lot of information about how you're feeling on any particular day or how you feel about certain experiences. And paying attention to that is important. And when we think about the purpose of emotions, especially the difficult ones, evolutionarily, we needed these specific emotions like anxiety and fear to help us get out of dangerous situations. And these emotions are constantly trying to tell us things. And so now in our modern society, we're not really in danger nearly as much as our ancestors, but we're still having these emotional reactions to the things that are happening in our environment because of these perceived threats, the way that we are taking in information. And if you have emotions that are still undigested, unresolved in your body from past experiences, there's going to be things that trigger that emotion to come up. And if you are not willing to be curious about your emotions and allow them to be there, it will just continue to persist and create more behavior and results in your life that you don't necessarily love or that you want to have. So there's a ton of emotions. I use this emotional wheel with my clients, especially because we don't have a very robust vocabulary when it comes to emotions. But, there's main emotions like joy, sadness, anger, fear. But a lot of times, I think Brene Brown says it best in Atlas of the Heart. She's like, it's like good, bad. And so what did she say? Uh, you feel good, you feel bad, you feel pissed off. Like we just don't really say, like we don't use specific language around emotions, but there are so many emotions. And the book Atlas of the Heart, I highly recommend. It's a very dense read, but it's kind of like an encyclopedia for emotions, and I love it. If you don't want to read the book, you can definitely go to, I think it was on HBO Go. There's a series, and she breaks down a lot of the emotions, and it's phenomenal. Now, these primary emotions, they can combine and create more complex, complicated feelings. And so it's just important to be able to distinguish in your body what these different emotions feel like. And the more time you spend connecting with your body, the easier it becomes to identify what these feelings are. And I think the more that you can do this, it's a practice. We don't, unless you grew up in a household that was very open about emotions and celebrated emotions and validated your emotions. Most of us adults just don't have this skill set yet. And I say yet because it's something that we all have the ability to learn. And I think about my daughter right now, and like she is born with all the feels and none of the strategies to handle them. And that's developmentally very appropriate. That's how we all are born. And the messaging that we often received was our emotions were an inconvenience, right? And that, if we were quiet, that we were good. And that if you cried, that you were weak. And even just as I'm talking about this, I think it's helpful to check in about what's your inner dialogue right now. as I'm talking about emotions? Is it making you uncomfortable? Is it bringing back memories of when you had big feelings and they were totally invalidated? It just people didn't even acknowledge how you were feeling and just told you to move on and get over it, right? And again, it's not, this isn't a like blame game. Like we're not blaming our parents or our caregivers or whoever. We're just bringing awareness to, of course, you didn't have the skill set. If you don't have someone that is willing and able to sit with their own emotions and demonstrate it and model it for you, it's just not going to happen. And that doesn't mean we're hopeless. We get to learn it now. And for me, I mean, just becoming a mom, I thought I really understood this, and I do. I understood it intellectually, but in practice, it's much harder. And the emotions that maybe I wasn't allowed to feel or I didn't know how to feel are very triggering to me when my daughter's feeling them. And I almost have an intolerance to her big emotions, not all of them, but the emotions that I didn't allow myself to permit. And so I'm learning how to permit these big emotions in order to help model for her how to process them. And it is hard work, my friend. Wow. It is hard work. It's so much easier to be unconscious and like yell. Ugh. And I'm ughing because there's been times where I've just completely been dysregulated and I allowed my daughter's dysregulation to bring my dysregulation to the forefront. And it felt like two toddlers interacting. Once I came out of it, I was I could bring humor to be like, you are the child, I'm the adult, and I am learning how to be with these big emotions. But I never learned how to be with these big emotions on this level. And wow, it is so eye-opening and so liberating. And that's what this podcast series is about for you, is when you can approach these big feelings in a way that makes you feel safe. It's pure liberation. You're not afraid of them. You're not afraid of being controlled by them. And when the behavior happens, when you don't love your behavior because you said something when you were angry, or you did something when you felt frustrated, or you shut down when you felt disappointed, the more accepting you are of your emotional experience, the less the behaviors exist. And when I'm working with clients, I can tell when they're having an adult temper tantrum internally. And let me tell you, when I'm watching a toddler's temper tantrum, that literally their body like it is insane. So much big energy moving through their body. I'm like, this is what's happening inside us adults, but we don't allow it to come out that way. And it comes out in these maladapted behaviors. So fascinating. So you can, see why it'd be so important to really give yourself the gift of freeing yourself from the emotional jail that we've locked ourselves in because we've suppressed how we felt for so long. And we push things down and we resist them and we avoid them. And you can only do that for so long. Now, I will say, if I didn't have a child, I probably would have kept going along with how things were. Now, I was doing the work on a conscious level, but not on this deep somatic, like feeling level, like approaching this from my body, and then also creating this container of safety for myself. Because I started to notice when my daughter was having these big emotions that I was never permitted to feel, or I didn't know how to feel when I was younger. I don't feel safe. And that makes me feel out of control. And then I default to anger and control because I feel out of control. And that's just so counterproductive when handling big feelings from a toddler. It's like throwing fire on fire. Like I said, it's like two toddlers that don't know how to emotionally regulate in just a space together. And so the work that I've been doing for myself is just allowing, validating, acknowledging all of the things. And it's been so helpful. And I'm not going to say it's been comfortable because it definitely hasn't been. But it's definitely getting better. Like it just becomes it's another skill, another tool in the toolkit. Now, you say like, oh, you're just so in touch with your feelings. Like, that's not what this is about. This isn't about being in tune with your feelings. I mean, a part of it is being aware of what feelings feel like in your body. But really, this process is really learning how to allow and process and feel, and permit, because chances are the more difficult emotions, you never learned how to allow them. And they're tough. They're tough to feel. They're especially alone. They're really hard to feel alone. And, in our modern world, we have a lot of distractions. We have a lot of ways and coping strategies that are not very healthy or helpful, but they work. They're effective. They help us ignore how we feel all the time. And that's a challenge that we have to be willing to overcome. Instead of reaching for our phone when we're bored, can we sit with the feeling of boredom? What's wrong with feeling bored? When we are feeling overwhelmed, can we sit with the feeling, the tornado of overwhelm moving through our body? And when there's fear, can you get curious about the fear, if it's a fear coming from a real threat or is it perceived? Being able to make that connection is just ultimately going to help you get everything you could ever want in your life. The more connected you are to your body and the more awareness you have to your emotions, the more resilient you become. And it's not just in the sense of, not feeling, not feeling negative emotions and only feeling positive emotions. It's really about allowing yourself to feel negative so that you can experience the positive. You need the contrast of emotions in order to really live the human experience. You can't know sadness without, you can't know joy without sadness, right? You have to become familiar with fear if you want to be courageous. You need the contrast. And when you avoid feeling the difficult emotion, the difficult vibration, it cuts you off from feeling the positive one. And those are very fleeting. They come and they go because we don't have necessarily resistance to feeling those. Sometimes we have a hard time allowing them because there's a core wound that's blocking us from feeling that way, of maybe feeling undeserving or not good enough, right? Because typically joy and contentment and fulfillment come from thoughts about ourself and the way that we're experiencing our life. So that's the first part. What are emotions, the roles of emotions, and the different types of emotions? There's this phenomenal app called How We Feel, and they categorize the emotions into these 4 quadrants about like unpleasant and high energy, unpleasant and low energy, which means vibration wise, like how that feels in your body, and then pleasant, high energy, pleasant, low energy. And it's very fascinating to start tracking and start seeing patterns. And it asks you questions about what you're doing, who are you with, and you really start to notice your patterns with how you're feeling. And I love it because it actually breaks down these different emotions in these different categories. And it helps you build a different vocabulary around emotions and get to know these emotions on a deeper level. So I'll put that in the show notes because that app is incredibly helpful. It's free. They also give a bunch of emotional regulation and processing strategies that you can experiment with. And they're all very, very simple. I've talked about this on a previous podcast, but I'll say it again. Processing emotions and regulating emotions are 2 different things. Regulating your emotions is something that's happening like in real time, like getting triggered by something. First, you have to regulate. And often, after you regulate, emotions start to bubble to the surface. So something triggers you, you go into a fight or flight response, or maybe more into a shutdown state. And once you stabilize and find balance again within your body, then you start to notice different emotions and thoughts kind of like come on up. And then that's when you validate or acknowledge, validate, and process the emotion. And that's sitting with it and describing the sensations and knowing how where it is in your body and maybe asking yourself what it's trying to tell you. That's different than self regulation because self regulation is getting yourself out of a stress response. So, just I want to touch on that distinction as well. So, let's talk a little bit about Inside Out too, because it's phenomenal. Riley, the main character, if you watch the first one, now she's a teenager. Before she was a little girl, and you get introduced to all these primary emotions, and joy goes missing, and then you learn that you can't, and then sadness has to go find joy, and the whole plot is about the story is about how you can't have sadness or joy without sadness. It's just so brilliant. I just remember bawling my eyes out. I felt so understood. Um, but in Inside Out 2, Riley is going to high school and she's hitting puberty. And I think it's something that we can all relate to. Like it's a tough time. It's a tough, tough time. And I think what I love the most about Inside Out 1 and Inside Out 2, I think it's so universal that almost everyone in the world can relate to it to some degree. Emotions and the thoughts that come along with them are something that every human being experiences. And when we feel like, we're out of control, we feel like our emotions control us. And Inside Out portrays our emotions in a way that just makes you feel so seen. And Inside Out 2 brings in some new characters. And the main new character is Anxiety, who's like kind of like a villain in a way, but like not really. It's just Anxiety, right? Like if we can relate. And I think all adults watching the movie can identify with this feeling of anxiety on a very deep level. And it's that feeling of being afraid that you are going to mess up, being not liked and wanting to belong. So, wanting to fit in, pushing aside your values to avoid any potential threat or danger. So, this character of Anxiety, I feel like is so relatable no matter what degree of anxiety you've ever experienced. I think any adult can relate to this feeling of anxiety because anxiety is this very ambiguous emotion, and there's all these different emotions that are kind of under this umbrella of anxiety, and it tends to show up to kind of distract us from other things that are going on, other emotions that we are feeling. But the character is so brilliantly represented in Inside Out 2, and it's kind of like gives you this sense of relief and validation, because we know other people experience anxiety, but there's this one scene, and I won't go into too much detail because I really hope that you see this movie. I mean, children will enjoy it. Definitely take a child to see it, but it's truly, I think, very enjoyable and also very cathartic for adults. Um, but there's a scene where Anxiety is frozen in place and kind of spinning around in circles. And it is such a brilliant visual and representation of how it feels in your body when you are, even if you've had a lot of anxiety or you're having an anxiety attack or a panic attack, or even if you've never had a panic attack before, um, but you experience anxiety. It's such a good representation when you're so stuck in the what ifs, and you're so stuck in the fear, and you're so stuck in all the things that could possibly go wrong, making you question every single move. And it really is such a relief because it does really help normalize this experience that I think we know that other humans have, but we forget. And it brings in that shared humanity. Um, but it's definitely something that is so important we normalize. Um, and not just normalize, but take it to the next step and really learn ways to cope and manage these emotions. Because in the movie, essentially, they're like, it's not going to go away. But once the anxiety no longer is in control of Riley, that's when her self concept really starts evolving. And the beginning of the movie it really hones in on this idea of self and belief system. And the way that they represent it is so beautiful. Like they drop the memory ball into the belief system, and then it creates this chord. And then when you hit the chord, it says what the belief is like, I'm a good person. And when these new emotions come up, it starts changing the self concept. And what's interesting is Joy, the other main character, is has been trying to control Riley's experience as well by putting discomfort and painful memories in the back of her mind so she doesn't think about it. And what she learns, she has this moment where she realizes by putting all of these painful memories in the back of her mind where she doesn't think about it, that it doesn't give her the opportunity to learn from challenges, to learn from mistakes. It doesn't allow her to fail and make mistakes and mess up, because trying to protect yourself in that way also doesn't give you the strategy to handle things when things don't go your way, when you go into different situations that are uncomfortable. And I laughed so hard when the scene about the back of the mind came up, because I totally relate to that as someone that only wanted to focus on the positive and only wanted to focus on happiness and only wanted to focus on feeling good. I would just put these painful things in the back of my mind and suppress them and pretend they never happened, and the shame that came with them. Uh, and I just remember in that scene feeling so validated and being like, okay, it's not just me. Like, and I obviously know that, but the representation in the movie Inside Out is just phenomenal. And it really is one of those movies where everybody, whoever wants to understand about themselves and learn about their emotions and understand that their emotions are just sending information to you at all times, it just sends the best message. I do think it's one of the most important movies that we could watch. And it's just so enjoyable. The animation, the storyline, the jokes, like just 10 out of 10. I had a friend text me and say, I hope you get a chance to see Inside Out too. And I was like, it's already on my list. And then we saw it the next day because I couldn't wait when I saw that it was coming out and just what the new plot line was. So that's my review on Inside Out 2. I hope that you feel compelled to see it because it is just so amazing. My sister and I are like, we got a lot to talk about because there is just so well done. But the thing that I took the most from it is just building that emotional awareness and the importance of recognizing and naming our emotions. Because when you do that, I think that it gives you the place of power back, or it gives you a sense of control. Because I think when we don't name our emotions and we can't recognize them, that's when we start to feel out of control. And that's kind of what was happening for Riley in the movie. She had all these new emotions that came from puberty and she didn't know what anxiety was, and it formed this self-concept of I'm not good enough. And I think that part of the movie really truly speaks to this core belief that so many of us are plagued by, of just not being good enough in different areas of our life. And it shows up in all of these sneaky ways. And when you can recognize and name your emotions, they stop having so much control on you. And the other side of it is by having this emotional awareness, it can help prevent emotional suppression, which then leads to just overall better mental health and well being, which then, as we know, impacts every other area of our life. And so, when we can learn how to no longer suppress our emotions and just allow them to be a part of our experience, that's when we feel our best. And to me, that's ultimate well being. The other thing that I think is really important to touch upon is the acceptance of the emotion. So often we judge ourselves for feeling a certain emotion, right? So let's say you're having, you're on a vacation and you're feeling sad. You're judging yourself for feeling sad. And you're like, I shouldn't feel sad. You should be grateful because you're on this vacation. It's like, no, you're a human. If something's making you sad, it's going to make you sad. Can you accept that you're feeling a certain way? And being able to accept your emotions rather than judge them helps you understand yourself better. And one of the best things that you can do is check in with yourself. I love this concept of being an emotional scientist versus an emotional judge. And when you're an emotional judge, you shut down the emotion. That's what puts it right back in its box and you shove it away. And you can't learn anything about yourself. As soon as you shut it down, that's it. But when you're an emotional judge, you're curious. Or when you're an emotional scientist, you're curious. You seek to understand. You don't suppress, you allow. And I love to invite in this element of compassion because if you really want to learn and grow, you have to have compassion for yourself. If you don't want to learn and grow, judge yourself all the way. It shuts down any ability to learn. But if you really want to learn and grow, if you truly are in the space of, I want to grow, I want to evolve, I want to get to know myself better, putting on this lens of emotional scientist is really going to help you do that. And the most simple way that you can do this is start, again, you can use that app. It's free, very effective, sends notifications for you to check in with how you're feeling. But also, you don't need an app. You can just be intentional in the morning. How am I feeling today? In the middle of the afternoon, set a reminder, put a post-it note on your computer. How am I feeling right now? In different situations, just having the awareness to check in with your body. It's really that simple. It's not rocket science by any means, but somewhere along the lines, it's become so hard to do this that most people just brush it off. They don't want to deal with it. They don't have time for it. So emotional awareness, emotional acceptance, understanding your emotions lead to better overall well-being and health. And so the impact on your well-being, it's so important to understand how managing your emotions can lead to better relationships, decision-making, and just your vitality. Because again, if your emotions are driving your actions, that's going to create the outcomes and results in your life. And so if you have an outcome or result that you don't love, you want to look at the actions you've taken. And then you want to look at what emotions have been driving it. Has fear been behind the wheel? Has anxiety been in control? What about overwhelm? Right? Those emotions are like putting fuel in your tank, but they're not taking you where you want to go. And so when you can learn and understand your emotions in this way and how it affects your behavior, it's going to improve your relationships. You're going to understand why you feel certain ways in relationships that you might have not understood before. It's going to influence your decision making. Are you making decisions from a place of fear? Are you making decisions from a place of love? And all of this impacts your mental, emotional, spiritual, physical health because it's all connected. And if we ignore this piece and we continue to suppress this piece, you're continuing to suppress important parts of yourself. So now I want to share how to become more aware of your emotions. I mean, the most simple way, like I said, is mindfulness and just practicing, even if it's just for a couple moments a day, to stay present with your body and emotions as they arise. Starting to recognize what your triggers are and where you default, like what your adaptive strategy is, whether it's reaching for your phone or eating a snack or mindlessly scrolling and checking email or whatever it is, notice and interrupt the pattern and check in with, okay, I'm doing this behavior. What was I feeling right before? That mindfulness and that presence really makes a huge difference. The other thing that you can do to become more aware is just bringing more awareness to your body and noticing physical sensations associated with different emotions. So, what does it feel like in your body? Where do you feel it? Is there a color? Is there a texture? Just being able to describe what the sensations feel like. And then, of course, journaling. I think journaling is the easiest access point because as soon as you start writing, it's going to help you figure it out. I just love asking myself why. Like, why did I act this way? Well, because I was feeling XYZ. There you go. And you become more familiar with it. You don't have to write a lot to figure it out, but it does really help you again, like be that detective, getting curious about what's going on inside my body. So, journaling, mindfulness, body awareness. Obviously, I'm going to say breath work because I find that using the breath to calm your mind and get out of your conscious mind gets you into your body. That helps you become more aware of the emotions that arise. It also helps you be more of an observer of what it is versus being like sucked in to it. The other thing that I find really helpful with my clients is accepting and processing the emotion. So the first thing is acknowledging when you're having an emotion and bringing in validation. When you can validate without judgment, that's half of the battle. Because the reason why we have a hard time feeling in the first place is because those emotions that we've experienced in our past were never validated. They also weren't witnessed by someone else in your life. When we're left alone with an emotion that's too big for us to handle, we just tuck it away. So being able to acknowledge and validate is so important. And then process and allow, and really being able to sit with the discomfort. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Now, again, most of us don't have this skill set and we never had it modeled for us. So, doing this with someone else, like having a coach or a therapist or someone that you feel safe with, is very helpful because when you're witnessing the emotions, it takes away the intensity. And you also get that validation. I also think that it's important to recognize the shared humanity of these emotions, how it's not just you that feels this way, even if it feels like that, even if you feel isolated in it. And that's why Inside Out 2, I think, is such a powerful movie because it takes away that isolation. And then the other thing is expression, finding healthy ways to express emotions. So if it's anger, finding an outlet to release your anger. If it's sadness, using sadness as a way, creativity, drawing as a way to express the sadness, using movement, dancing, somatic exercises to help express the emotions. The emotions just want to be expressed. They want to be let go. Um, it's funny, I didn't touch on this yet, but I got my daughter this book called The Grand Hotel of Feelings, and she loves it. We have read it every single night since I've got it. We've read it like multiple times a day. And there's a manager of the hotel, and it talks about these different difficult emotions that come to stay. And the plot is just a beautiful it's just a beautiful plot line because the manager talks about how you never know what to expect and you can't rush them. Some guests stay longer than others. And her job as the manager is to talk to each emotion and see what they need. And sometimes when there's too many demands from the emotions, that it can feel really overwhelming. And then that's when another emotion checks in. And it's just such a beautiful way to especially speak to a toddler about emotions, but also in a way that adults can really relate to it as well, of like seeing our bodies as the hotel and our consciousness as the manager. And I think if we start identifying, the guests that come to our hotel, the more accepting and allowing we can be of those emotions, knowing that they're not going to stay. They're going to come and go, but you can't rush it. You can't rush through it because then that creates even more resistance.
And so accepting and processing and allowing is such an important piece. And it really is so simple. It's so simple, we don't do it. And it's also really uncomfortable. So the simplicity of it make us feel like I don't have time for that. That's fluffy. And then the discomfort is like we avoid discomfort at all costs. So that's why we don't do it. But if you can make a conscious effort and make this something that's important to you, it just becomes another skill, another tool in the toolbox. So that's what I have for you today. Emotional liberation. Excited to dive into the different emotions. We're going to talk about anger and shame, something that I've worked with a lot lately. We're going to talk about sadness and joy. We're going to talk about courage and fear. I'm just very excited to dive into the specific emotions and give some tangible, practical things that you can do to work with each emotion. You'll start to notice kind of a theme because, the process of being and allowing these emotions are very similar, but different emotions are constantly communicating different things to us. And I think it's really important to distinguish what those needs are, what that data, what that information is. So, we talked about understanding emotions, the purpose of emotions. We talked about emotional awareness, emotional acceptance, impact on well being. I hope you feel compelled to see Inside Out 2. So good. I can't wait to see it again. And I think the biggest thing that I hope that you take away from this episode is just seeing your emotions as signals and guides. They're messengers, they're windows into our subconscious. It helps us get to know ourselves better. So, if you're craving that connection with other people, you have to be willing to connect with yourself. And the way that you do that is through your emotions. Your emotions are not fluffy, your emotions are not weak. I am not a scientific podcast. I am speaking all from experience, but there are very sciency podcasts that are talking about this. And if that's you, if you want to understand like the science behind it, I highly recommend taking the time to research the science behind it. For me, I learned through experience, and I can tell that the main component of my growth and transformation has been allowing myself to feel. And I did not know how to do that. And I was so afraid of feeling the emotions that I shoved so far down. I just didn't feel safe to feel those emotions. And now being able to do that for myself is truly the best gift I could ever give myself. It ain't easy, but it's so worth it. And so that's what I wanted to share with you today. Give these simple practices a try this week. If anything comes up or you have questions about it, please let me know. I hope that you feel seen in your emotional experiences. I want you to know that if you ever don't feel seen, I am here to see you and to help validate those emotions because they're very real and they're very real to you. And no emotion is ridiculous. No emotion is bad. They're all just a part of being a human being. So that's what I have for you today. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you for spending time with me on this beautiful Tuesday. Until next time, remember to love yourself, feel your feels, and let your light shine because you're so worthy of it. Until next time.